Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was the son of All Might and Inko, and had three siblings, Izumi, Izuma, and Izuka, but was neglected then kidnapped by All for One and Lex Luthor, who experimented on him and discovered Superman and Lois Lane's DNA? Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The air in the Yagi household crackled. It was a literal statement, not a metaphorical one. Faint, gossamer thin strands of golden energy, remnants of his sister Izuka's latest creation, still drifted near the ceiling, smelling faintly of ozone and burnt sugar. The house itself, a modern fortress of hero-grade reinforced concrete and shatterproof glass nestled in a quiet, high-security suburb of Mizudafu, seemed to hum with a latent power, a constant thrum of energy that was the background noise of Izuka's life. Today, that hum was a roaring crescendo. Today was the triplets' 10th birthday. It was his 10th birthday, too. That was a detail often lost in the whirlwind. From the doorway of his room, Izuku watched the storm of preparation. His mother, Inko, was a blur of green apron efficiency, her telekinetic quirk, a minor but precise power, flitting through the air around her. Spoons stirred punch bowls on their own, streamers unspooled and attached themselves to the walls with practiced ease, and a runaway napkin was gently guided back to its stack. But even with her quirk's help, a sheen of sweat graced her brow. Her smile was wide, but her eyes held the familiar, harried look of a woman trying to orchestrate the orbit of 3 suns while being married to the galaxy itself. "Izuma, for the last time, please stop punching the load-bearing pillars," she called out, her voice tight. "Endeavor is coming today, and I will not have him think we live in a house that's actively falling apart." A loud, booming laugh answered her. "Nonsense, Inko my dear! The boy is just testing his limits. That's the spirit of a true hero." Toshinori Yagi, in his skeletal, true form, emerged from the kitchen, a tray of carefully arranged sandwiches in his hands. He looked more like a friendly scarecrow than the symbol of peace, but the light in his blue eyes was the same. It was a light, however, that seemed to shine brightest when it landed on his other children. Izuma, a boy built like a miniature brawler with a shock of blonde hair inherited from his father, grinned from beside a column that now sported a small spiderweb of cracks. "See? Dad gets it. My quirk, impact force, needs to be pushed. How else am I gonna be stronger than you, old man? That's the spirit!" Toshinori boomed, placing the tray down and ruffling Izuma's hair with a hand that seemed impossibly large and bony. In the center of the sprawling living room, their other 2 siblings held court. Izumi, the clear leader, stood with her arms crossed. Her long green hair, a richer, darker shade than their mother's, floated slightly around her as she used her own powerful telekinesis, kinetic queen, to arrange the furniture. Unlike Inko's gentle guidance, Izumi's power was an invisible, crushing force. A heavy sofa slid across the floor without a sound, stopping on a dime. She had a regal air, an innate confidence that bordered on arrogance. She was the one who looked most like a prodigy, and she knew it. Izuka, the quietest of the 3, sat on the newly positioned couch, weaving threads of golden light between her fingers. Her quirk, Energy Weaver, was the most beautiful. She could create semi-solid constructs, shimmering shields, and dazzling projectiles. Right now, she was crafting a flock of glowing birds that swooped and danced through the air before dissolving into harmless sparks. She caught Izuka's eye for a fraction of a second, a flicker of something unreadable in her expression, before she looked away, back to her art. It was the closest thing to an acknowledgement he usually received from them. Izuka clutched the worn All Might action figure in his hand, its plastic smile as bright and unwavering as the real thing. In his other hand, he held his notebook. Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 6. He'd stayed up all night working on it. Not on just any heroes, but on his siblings. He'd broken down the application of Izuma's quirk, theorizing how he could mitigate the recoil by redistributing the absorbed impact through his legs instead of just his arms. He'd sketched out potential energy constructs for Izuka, shapes that would offer better defensive coverage. He'd even tried to map the theoretical weight limit of Izumi's telekinesis based on the strain he saw on her face when she lifted heavier objects. He thought, perhaps foolishly, that it could be his present to them. A way to connect, to be useful. He wasn't strong, or flashy, or powerful. But he was smart. He could see things they didn't. He could help them become even better heroes. Maybe then, his father would look at him with that same brilliant pride. He stepped out of his room, a small shadow slipping into the bright, chaotic light of the living room. His own room was a stark contrast. It was smaller than the others, tucked away at the end of the hall, where their rooms were shrines to their own accomplishments, filled with training equipment, design stations, and early bird offers from hero support companies. His was a shrine to someone else, All Might. Posters, figures, bedsheets, all bearing the iconic, V-shaped smile. It was less a room and more a prayer. A desperate, silent plea to be seen by the very man whose image papered his walls. "Mom?" he said, his voice barely a whisper. Inko turned, her harried expression softening for a moment. "Oh, Izuku, sweetie. Are you ready for the party? Did you put on the nice shirt I left out?" "Yes, Mom," he confirmed, tugging at the collar of the stiff, formal shirt. I wanted to show you something." He held up the notebook. She wiped a hand on her apron, her eyes darting towards the front door where the first guests were scheduled to arrive any minute. "Oh, honey, that's wonderful. Another one of your notebooks. You're so dedicated. But can it wait just a little while? The caterers are having a crisis with the mini quiches, and I think Izumi just telekinetically rearranged the entire cutlery drawer into a modern art sculpture." The dismissal was gentle, wrapped in the soft cotton of maternal stress, but it was a dismissal all the same. "Oh. Okay, Mom," he retreated, the notebook feeling heavier in his hand. He would try his father next. Dad always had time for hero talk. An hour later, the house was a roaring sea of sound and color. Pro-heroes in their civilian attire mingled with reporters and support company executives. The air was thick with booming laughs, heady perfumes, and the electric tang of barely suppressed quirks. Izuku navigated the forest of adult legs, a small, quiet vessel in a storm-tossed ocean. He found his father, now in his magnificent all-might form, standing in the center of a captivated circle. The change was always breathtaking. The skeletal man was gone, replaced by a mountain of muscle and charisma, a living embodiment of the word hero. He was telling a story, his voice a baritone symphony that commanded the attention of everyone present. And there I was, grappling with toxic chainsaw, and he says to me, "All Might, you're finished," and I just looked at him and said, "Young villain, you're forgetting one thing. I am here." The crowd erupted in laughter and applause. All Might's smile seemed to light up the room. This was his element. Nearby, the triplets were putting on the main event. A reinforced training mat had been rolled out in the center of the room. Izuma stood on it, a cocky grin on his face. "All right, who's next?" he challenged. "Who wants to see real power?" Fat Gum, in his slimmer form, chuckled. "All right, kid, show us what you've got." He gave Izuma a playful, but still powerful, shove. Izuma staggered back, his body glowing with a faint orange light as he absorbed the kinetic energy of the push. He planted his feet, a guttural yell tearing from his throat, and punched a high-tech training dummy that had been set up. The impact wasn't just a punch, it was an explosion. A shockwave of force erupted from his fist, sending a concussive boom through the room that rattled the reinforced windows. The dummy's torso crumpled like a tin can. The heroes roared their approval. "Incredible! Just like his father. That kid's going straight to the top." All Might's chest swelled with a pride so immense it seemed to add to his physical size. "That's my boy. Excellent form, Izuma. You kept your core tight." This was it. This was his chance. Izuku pushed his way through the crowd, his heart hammering against his ribs. He held up his notebook, already open to the correct page. "Dad! All Might!" he called out, his voice thin in the din. All Might looked down, his vast blue eyes finally landing on Izuku. For a second, Izuku's heart soared. He saw him. "Ah, Izuku! My boy!" he boomed, reaching down to place a hand on Izuku's head that felt as heavy as a manhole cover. The touch was meant to be affectionate, but it was proprietary, dismissive. "Enjoying the party? It's quite the spectacle, isn't it? Seeing your siblings shine like this." "It is," Izuku squeaked, trying to angle the notebook so his father could see the diagrams. I was just thinking, with Izuma's quirk, if he channeled the kinetic blowback down through his stance instead of letting it dissipate in his torso, he could probably increase his output by another 12% without any extra strain. I drew how he could. All Might wasn't listening. His gaze had already drifted back to Izuma, who was now being praised by Endeavor, a rare, almost smile gracing the face of the number 2 hero. "That's wonderful, my boy." A true supporter, All Might said, his voice distant, his attention fully captured by the sight of his powerful son being acknowledged by his greatest rival. He gave Izuku's head one final, absent-minded pat. "You keep watching them. Your support means the world to them, I'm sure." The hand lifted. The connection was broken. The brilliant blue eyes moved on, and Izuku was left alone in the crowd, his notebook open to a page no one would ever read. The words blurred as tears pricked at the corners of his eyes. A true supporter. Not a hero. Not a son. A supporter. A spectator. A fan. He blinked the tears back, shame and disappointment churning in his gut. It was fine. Dad was busy. He was the symbol of peace. He had to focus on the children with real hero potential. Izuku understood. He always understood. He closed the notebook with a soft snap and turned, looking for a corner to disappear into. That's when he heard the voice of a reporter from a well-known heroics magazine, a woman with a microphone quirk that made her voice subtly more engaging. She was interviewing Izumi. "It's simply astounding, Izumi-chan," the reporter cooed. 3 children in one family, all with such top-tier quirks. The Yagi legacy is clearly in good hands. What a blessing for All Might and your mother. Izumi preened, her chin held high. She levitated a small silver spoon from a nearby table and began to tie it into an intricate knot without touching it, a casual display of fine motor control that was frankly terrifying. "Of course. It's only natural. We're the children of the number 1 hero. We were born to be great." The reporter's eyes scanned the room. "And I understand there's a 4th? Another birthday boy today?" Izuku froze. His blood ran cold. He tried to shrink back, to melt into the wallpaper, but it was too late. Several people, including the reporter, were now looking around, their curiosity piqued. Izumi followed their gaze, and her eyes landed directly on Izuku. A flicker of annoyance crossed her perfect features. Her smile tightened, becoming something sharp and brittle. She didn't call him over. She didn't introduce him. She let out a small, dismissive laugh, as if the reporter had asked a silly, inconsequential question. "Oh, you mean Izuku," she said, her voice carrying easily in a momentary lull. She flicked her wrist, and the knotted spoon dropped back onto the table with a clatter. "That's just our brother. Don't worry about him. He's normal." The word hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Normal. In the world of heroes and quirks, it was the cruelest adjective imaginable. It meant plain. It meant powerless. It meant useless. It meant quirkless. The reporter's professional smile faltered for a second. She offered an awkward cough and quickly changed the subject. "Right, of course. Now, about your potential application to UA." But the damage was done. The people who had been looking at Izuku now looked away, their curiosity satisfied and extinguished. He was a footnote, a genetic anomaly, a quirk of fate in a family of demigods. He saw the pity in some of their eyes, the dismissal in others. He felt 100 gazes slide off him, rendering him invisible once more. That was the blow that finally shattered him. It wasn't the preoccupied dismissal from his parents, but the casual, public cruelty from his own sister. He turned, his small body trembling, and fled. No one noticed him go. He pushed his way through the laughing, celebrating crowd, the sounds of his own party turning into a discordant roar in his ears. The house felt alien, a foreign land where he didn't belong. He passed the grand staircase that led to the 2nd floor, to his siblings' rooms. Izuma's door was covered in posters of wrestlers and brawling heroes. Izumi's was painted a regal purple, a custom-made sign in elegant script reading, "Izumi's Domain." Izuku's was adorned with constellations that glowed with a soft, residual energy. His own door, at the far end of the hall, was plain wood, distinguished only by a slightly faded All Might sticker he'd put there when he was 6. He slipped inside, closing it gently behind him. The click of the latch was a final, definitive sound, shutting out the world that had no place for him. His room was small, neat, and suffocatingly quiet. The only sounds were the muffled thumps of the party downstairs and the frantic, painful beating of his own heart. He sank onto the edge of his bed, the All Might-themed comforter cool beneath his trembling hands. The action figure was still clutched in his fist, its plastic smile a mockery. The notebook lay discarded beside him. All his work, all his analysis, all his hope, reduced to a pile of paper and ink. Normal, the word echoed in the silent room. Was that all he was? He looked at his hands. They were small, uncalloused, and utterly ordinary. There was no crackle of energy, no surge of power waiting to be unleashed. He was just Izuku, the quirkless Yagi. The shadow cast by the brilliant light of his family. Tears, hot and stinging, finally fell. They dripped onto his hero analysis notebook, smudging the ink of a diagram he'd been so proud of. He cried without making a sound, a lifetime of small hurts, of being overlooked and undervalued, coalescing into a single, crushing wave of despair. He cried for the times his father had left to train his siblings, patting his head and telling him to stay safe inside. He cried for the times his mother, exhausted from managing 3 powerful quirks, had simply been too tired to listen to his excited ramblings about a new hero debut. He cried for every time Izuma had called him a Deku, a useless person, and for every time Izumi had looked at him with that same withering disappointment he'd seen today. He cried because, deep down, a terrifying part of him believed they were right. After a long time, the tears subsided, leaving behind a hollow ache in his chest. He wiped his face with the back of his sleeve and reached for the small remote on his nightstand. He pointed it at the old television in the corner of his room and pressed play. The screen flickered to life, showing grainy, decade-old footage. A disaster scene. A multi-story building had collapsed, smoke and dust choking the air. People were screaming, running in terror. Then, from out of the rubble, a figure emerged, carrying a dozen people on his back. He was young, his costume a slightly different design, but the smile was the same. The booming laugh was the same. It was All Might's debut. Have no fear, the younger All Might on the screen declared, his voice filled with an indomitable power that seemed to shake the camera itself. Because I am here, Izuku watched, mesmerized, as he had 1,000 times before. He watched his father save person after person, his strength seemingly limitless, his optimism a shield against all despair. This was the man who lived in his house. This was the hero he wanted to be. This was the father he couldn't reach. He curled up on his bed, hugging his knees to his chest, the faint sounds of the party below a distant, meaningless hum. He watched the video on a loop, the image of his smiling, heroic father the only comfort in his profound loneliness. The tears started again, but this time they were quiet, resigned. He rested his forehead against his knees, his small shoulders shaking. I just want to be like you, he whispered to the flickering image on the screen, his voice raw with a child's desperate, impossible wish. Why can't I be like you? The room was quiet save for the audio from the television. He was so lost in his own world of grief, so consumed by the shadow he lived in, that he failed to notice the faintest of changes in the world outside his window. Hovering there, almost perfectly silent against the twilight sky, was a small, dark object. It was no bigger than a hummingbird, its design sleek and non-reflective, a marvel of stealth technology. A single, multifaceted crimson lens was focused entirely on him, recording his every tear, his every shudder, his every whispered, heartbreaking word. It registered the emotional distress, the familial isolation, the boy's desperate desire for power and recognition. The drone, a silent predator, had found its target. It had gathered all the data it needed. After a few more moments of silent observation, it emitted a soft, inaudible ping, transmitting its findings to 2 very different, very patient masters. Then, without a sound, it retracted its minuscule thrusters and shot away into the darkening sky, leaving the lonely boy in the shadow of the symbol, completely and utterly unaware that his life was about to be stolen and broken, only to be reforged in fire and alien science. The party downstairs would eventually end, His family would eventually notice his absence, but by then, it would already be far too late. 3 weeks passed. The echoes of the disastrous birthday party faded, not because wounds had healed, but because they had been meticulously ignored. The Yagi household returned to its usual rhythm, a cadence dictated by the training schedules of the triplets, and the heroic obligations of All Might. The suffocating silence that had followed Izuku's retreat to his room on that day was simply absorbed into the general background noise of their lives. No one apologized. No one spoke of it. Izuku, for his part, buried the hurt deep inside, adding it to a growing collection of similar moments, a sad and heavy treasure he kept hidden from the world. He retreated further into his notebooks, into the world of heroes where valor and kindness were supposed to be the ultimate powers. He told himself it was enough. Then came the promise of a family outing. The words, spoken by his mother over breakfast, had sent a fragile, tentative flutter of hope through Izuku's chest. A real one? Not a press event, not a gala, but just them? Maybe they would go to the coast, or have a picnic, or visit the science museum he'd been circling in a brochure for months. The destination, however, was Dagoba Municipal Park. It was a sprawling expanse of green, famous for its picturesque lake and its wide-open fields that were, by an unspoken city ordinance, unofficially reserved for those with powerful quirks who needed space to stretch their legs. The moment they arrived, the fragile hope in Izuku's chest dissolved like sugar in water. A small crowd of onlookers had already gathered at a respectful distance. A few reporters, tipped off by some unseen network, were present, their cameras disguised but their intentions obvious. This wasn't a family outing. It was a performance. All right, gang. Tashinori's voice, already amplified by his transformation into All Might, boomed across the field. He was in his element, a radiant sun drawing all eyes. The goal today is combination and control. Izuka, you'll work on weaving your powers together. Izuma, you're the wrecking ball. Let's see you anticipate their movements. Inko spread a large blanket under the shade of a sturdy oak tree, arranging a picnic basket that was clearly more for show than for sustenance. She smiled brightly, a practiced, perfect smile for the cameras, but her eyes darted nervously towards Izuku. Izuku, sweetie, why don't you stay here with me on the blanket? She offered, her voice a little too cheerful. You can help me keep the sandwiches safe from ants. Can I watch? He asked, his voice small. His gaze was fixed on the field where his siblings were already taking their positions, their bodies practically thrumming with power. Of course, honey, but stay close. It can get a little dangerous when they really let loose. It was a reasonable request, but the subtext was clear: you are fragile. You don't belong out there. He sat on the edge of the blanket, his all-might action figure in one hand and a new, slim notebook in the other. He watched as the training began. It was, he had to admit, spectacular. Izuka wove shimmering golden shields, intricate and beautiful, while Izumi used her telekinesis to hurl large rocks she'd ripped from the earth. Izuma would meet the projectiles head-on, his body glowing as he absorbed their momentum, before redirecting the force into the ground, cratering the earth with thunderous booms. All Might stood at the center of it all, a proud conductor orchestrating a symphony of destruction. More control, Izuka! Don't let the shield waver. Izuma, use your legs. Drive the power from your stance. Izumi, faster. Anticipate his charge. He was a brilliant teacher. He saw every flaw, every opportunity for improvement. He just couldn't see the small boy sitting under the tree, scribbling notes he would never be asked to share. After an hour, they took a break. The triplets, sweating and exhilarated, jogged over to the blanket, grabbing water bottles. Did you see that last one? Izuma boasted, slamming his fist into his palm. I bet I could have leveled that whole line of trees if Dad had let me. Your form was sloppy, Izumi countered, wiping her brow with a telekinetically lifted towel. You were off balance. I had to adjust the trajectory of the last boulder by 3 degrees, or you would have missed entirely. Oh yeah? Well, your focus is weak. One of Izuka's shields almost fizzled out. Izuka just shrugged, taking a delicate sip of water. I was recalculating the tensile strength needed for the next wave. It's called strategy. You should try it. As they bickered, Izuka saw his opening. That was amazing, he said, his voice earnest. Izuma, I think if you twisted your hips just a little more when you released the energy, you'd get a wider shockwave. And Izumi, you're right about the focus. But maybe if you tried to feel the object's center of gravity instead of just its surface, you wouldn't have to work so hard. The three of them stopped arguing and turned to stare at him. The air grew thick with a familiar, uncomfortable silence. Izuma scoffed, a cruel smirk on his face. What would you know about it, Deku? You can barely lift a textbook without whining. He snatched a spare rubber training ball from their gear bag. Here, you want to be a hero analyst? Analyze this. He tossed the ball into the air, and with a flick of his wrist, imbued it with a terrifying amount of kinetic energy. The harmless ball was now a humming, vibrating missile. He didn't throw it at Izuku, not directly, but he bounced it off the ground a few feet in front of him. The ball ricocheted with the force of a cannonball, whistling past Izuku's head so closely he felt the air displace. It slammed into the oak tree behind him, leaving a deep, splintered indentation before falling to the ground, inert once more. Izuku flinched back, his heart leaping into his throat. He hadn't even seen it move, just felt the sonic passage of it. Izuma! Inko gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. All Might's booming voice cut through the tension. Enough, Izuma. That was reckless. We don't use our quirks on those who can't defend themselves. The words, meant to be a reprimand, landed on Izuku like a physical blow. Those who can't defend themselves. It wasn't a defense of him as a brother. It was a statement of his weakness, a classification. He was a different species, a creature to be protected from the real world. Sorry, Izuma mumbled, not looking sorry at all. Izumi just rolled her eyes. Honestly, you're all so dramatic. It wouldn't have even hit him. Stop being such a baby, Izuku. That was it. The last thread of his desire to be there snapped. The beautiful park, the sunny day, the idea of family, it was all a lie. He was an accessory, a liability, a ghost haunting their victory parade. Quietly, he stood up. He brushed the grass from his pants, his face a careful, blank mask to hide the stinging hurt. His mother started to say something, but All Might called the triplets back to the field for the next drill, and she was once again distracted by the brilliance of her other children. No one stopped him as he turned and walked away. He didn't storm off. He just ambled, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, the All Might figure a familiar, hard shape against his knuckles. He walked away from the sounds of explosions and shouting, away from the adoring crowd, away from his family. He followed a winding dirt path that led away from the main fields and deeper into the quieter, more wooded section of the park. The air grew cooler here, the light dappled by the thick canopy of leaves overhead. The sounds of the city faded, replaced by the chirping of insects and the gentle rustle of leaves. He found himself by a small, secluded pond, its surface a mirror of murky green and reflected sky. A few old, weathered benches sat near the water's edge. It was peaceful. Here, he wasn't quirkless. He was just a boy. He sat on a bench, pulling the action figure from his pocket. He stared at its unblinking, painted smile. Why am I not good enough? He whispered to the toy, the question a raw, aching thing in his throat. He didn't expect an answer. The plastic hero remained silent, a perfect, unchanging symbol of everything he could never be. He didn't know how long he sat there, lost in his own lonely thoughts. 5 minutes. 10. The sun was warm on his back, a gentle, comforting pressure. He felt a sudden chill, a strange drop in the ambient temperature that made the hairs on his arms stand up. The chirping of the insects abruptly ceased. The world went preternaturally still. He looked up, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. The air in front of him seemed to waver, like heat haze on a summer road. But it wasn't hot, it was cold. A deep, unnatural cold. The shimmering air coalesced, darkening into a swirling vortex of purple-black mist. It made no sound, but he could feel it, a low, gut-deep vibration that seemed to pull at the very air he was breathing. A warp gate. He recognized it instantly from his studies. Kuroji's quirk. The League of Villains. Panic, cold and absolute, seized him. He scrambled backwards, his mouth opening to scream, but the sound was strangled in his throat. He had to run, to get to his dad. All Might could save him. Before he could take a single step, a hand clamped over his mouth from behind. It was impossibly strong, the grip like iron. Another arm snaked around his waist, lifting him off his feet as if he weighed nothing. He kicked and struggled, his small fists beating uselessly against a body as solid as stone. He was dragged backwards, not away from the portal, but through it. The sensation was indescribable, a nauseating lurch of being turned inside out and squeezed through a pinhole. The world dissolved into a smear of cold, suffocating darkness. There was a smell of ozone and something else, something sterile and wrong. The trip lasted only a second, but it felt like an eternity. He was thrown forward, landing hard on a cold, metal floor. The portal snapped shut behind him with a faint whoosh, plunging him into near-total darkness. The hand was gone from his mouth, but he was too terrified to scream now. He was hyperventilating, his small body trembling uncontrollably. He was in a vehicle of some kind. He could feel the gentle rumble of an engine, the slight sway of motion. The air was cold and smelled of antiseptic and stale, recycled air. A success, it would seem. The voice was calm, cultured, and utterly devoid of warmth. It came from the darkness in front of him. The drone's analysis was flawless. Isolation, emotional vulnerability, the perfect conditions. A faint light flickered on, a single, low-wattage bulb that illuminated the interior. It was the back of a large, windowless van. The walls were lined with strange, metallic equipment, and sitting on a bench opposite him were two figures. One was a nightmare made manifest. He was a hulking man in a dark, impeccably tailored suit, but his head was a terrifying mass of scar tissue, his face obliterated. He had no visible eyes or nose, just a mouth filled with a tangle of tubes that led to a complex, hissing life support system on his chest. Izuku knew him instantly. The villain of villains, the boogeyman of the hero world. All for one. The other man was his complete opposite. He was human, impeccably dressed in a sharp, expensive business suit, his head perfectly bald and gleaming in the dim light. His expression was one of cold, intellectual curiosity, his intelligent eyes assessing Izuku not as a child, but as a specimen. He looked utterly out of place, and yet he sat beside the monstrous villain with an air of complete and equal authority. Who are you? Izuku stammered, his voice trembling. My dad. All Might, he'll find you. The bald man actually smiled, a thin, bloodless stretching of his lips. All Might. Yes. The big, grinning ape in the primary colors? He is precisely why you are here, son. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, almost gentle tone that was more terrifying than any shout. Don't be afraid. We aren't going to kill you. We are going to elevate you. Your father, in his obsession with the genetic lottery of quirks, may have seen you as a genetic dead end. The phrase hit Izuku like a punch to the gut. It was a cold, clinical version of Izumi's insult, of Izuma's taunts, of his father's dismissive protection. It was the truth of his life, spoken by a stranger in a dark van. But we, the man continued, gesturing between himself and the monstrous all for one, we see you as the key to a new era. You are untapped potential, a vessel, pure and unburdened by the chaotic mutations you call quirks. You are the perfect blank slate. The monstrous figure, all for one, let out a low, rasping chuckle that seemed to rattle the very frame of the van. The sound was layered, distorted by the breathing apparatus. Your father casts a very long shadow, little Izuku Yagi, the villain rasped, the fact that he knew his name sending a fresh wave of terror through the boy. He is so focused on the children who reflect his light, he has forgotten the one who languishes in the darkness. But do not worry. We have not forgotten. We have been watching. We see your potential. We will give you the power you so desperately crave. A power that will make your fathers pale in comparison. He gave you nothing. We will give you everything. Izuku stared at them, his mind reeling. This wasn't a simple kidnapping. It wasn't for ransom. It was something worse, something incomprehensible. They weren't going to hurt him in the way villains usually did, they were going to change him. My name, the bald man said, straightening his tie with a precise, methodical movement, is Lex Luthor. And this is your first day of a brand new life. Consider it a gift. The single dim light in the van went out, plunging Izuku back into absolute darkness, alone with the chilling words, the sound of labored breathing, and the low rumble of the engine carrying him away from everything he had ever known. Back at the park, another hour had passed. The training session had ended in a triumphant display. For their final act, Izumi had levitated a dozen training dummies high into the air, and Izuku had trapped them in a cage of shimmering energy, while Izuma, launched by one of All Might's own throws, had smashed through them like a meteor. The crowd and the reporters had gone wild. All Might stood with his hands on his hips, his signature smile beaming as he soaked in the adoration for his children. Inko was clapping, tears of pride in her eyes. It was a picture-perfect moment for the symbol of peace and his family of prodigies. "All right, that's enough for one day," All Might announced, his voice filled with satisfaction. "Let's pack it up and get some real food." "My treat." The triplets, high on adrenaline and praise, cheered. As they began gathering their gear, Inko started folding the blanket. "Has anyone seen Izuku?" she asked casually, her eyes scanning the nearby area. "I thought he was right here. He probably got bored and wandered off to the playground," Izuma grunted, hefting a bag over his shoulder. "Someone should go get him," Izumi said, levitating her own equipment into a neat pile. "Honestly, he's 10 years old. You'd think he'd know not to wander off." A small, cold knot of worry began to form in Inko's stomach. "Tashinori," she said, her voice a little tighter now, "do you see him?" All Might, still smiling for a few lingering fans, turned his attention to his wife. "What's that, my dear?" "Izuku. He's not here. He walked off over an hour ago." The smile on All Might's face didn't falter, but a flicker of concern entered his eyes. "An hour? I'm sure he's fine. This is one of the safest parks in the city. He's probably just exploring." He raised his voice, letting it carry across the fields. "Izuku! Time to go," only the wind answered. The knot in Inko's stomach tightened into a cold fist. "He wouldn't go this far," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "He knows better." The triplets exchanged uneasy glances, their post-training euphoria beginning to evaporate. "I'll check the playground," Izuma said, his usual bravado gone, replaced by a thin veneer of worry. He jogged off. "Izuka, check the restrooms," All Might commanded, his tone now losing its performative edge and gaining a genuine urgency. "Izumi, scan the fields from above." Izumi rose a few feet into the air, her brow furrowed in concentration as her eyes swept the park. After a minute, she floated back down, shaking her head. "I don't see him. Not on the fields, not by the entrance." Izuma and Izuka returned moments later with the same news. The playground was empty. The restrooms were deserted. The cold fist in Inko's gut was now an icy dread spreading through her veins. "Toshi," she breathed, her voice trembling. All Might's public smile had vanished completely. In its place was a grim, tight-lipped line. The concern in his eyes had morphed into a dawning, terrible fear. He looked towards the path Izuku had taken, the one that led into the woods. "Stay here," he ordered, his voice a low growl. He strode towards the path, his long legs eating up the ground. The family followed him, unable to stay put. He called his son's name again, and this time, it was not the confident boom of the symbol of peace. It was the raw, desperate cry of a father. "Izuku!" They found the secluded pond just as the sun was beginning to set, casting long, ominous shadows through the trees. The area was quiet. Too quiet. The bench was empty, and there, lying half in the dirt at the water's edge, was a small, plastic action figure. It was All Might, its bright color sullied with mud, its signature smile facing down into the dirt as if in shame. Inko let out a choke sob, her hands flying to her mouth. The triplets froze, their faces pale with a horror they had never known. This was real. This wasn't training. This wasn't a game. Tashinori Yagi stared at the fallen toy. It was the one Izuku carried everywhere. The one he clutched in his sleep. The one that was his most prized possession. He would never, ever have just left it behind. In that moment, the number one hero, the symbol of peace, the man who stood as a pillar against all the world's evil, felt that pillar crack. The strength drained from his massive frame, replaced by a cold, hollowing terror that was worse than any villain's punch. He fell to his knees, his large hands trembling as he reached out and picked up the small, muddy figure. He looked at the toy, then at the empty, silent woods around them. His son was gone. Taken. Right from under his nose, while he had been basking in the glory of his other children. While he had been performing, a roar of pure, unadulterated anguish tore itself from his throat. It was a sound of primal grief and rage, a sound no one had ever heard from All Might before. It ripped through the peaceful park, scattering birds from the trees and echoing across the empty fields. The sound of a god discovering that he was, after all, just a man, and he had failed. The world, for Izuku, became a place of antiseptic white, humming machinery, and a constant, low-grade pain that settled deep in his bones. The journey in the dark van had ended in an underground garage, where he was hustled through a series of sterile corridors, his small feet barely touching the ground. He was too paralyzed by fear to fight back. The last thing he saw before a needle pricked his arm and plunged him into a black, dreamless sleep was the impassive, bald head of Lex Luthor, his face illuminated by the cold blue light of a computer monitor. He awoke on a slab. It wasn't a bed. It was a cold, hard, metallic table, barely padded, in the center of a room that was more operating theater than bedroom. The ceiling was a grid of blindingly bright fluorescent lights that made his eyes ache. The air was frigid, smelling of ozone, iodine, and something else, a strange, metallic tang that coated the back of his throat. He was dressed in a thin, paper-like tunic that offered no warmth. Heavy, magnetic cuffs were clasped around his wrists and ankles, binding him to the slab with an unbreakable grip. Panic, stark and absolute, surged through him. He pulled against the restraints, his breath coming in ragged, terrified gasps. The cuffs didn't budge. He was trapped. He's awake. Lex Luthor's voice, amplified by the room's acoustics, came from an unseen speaker. Vitals are stable. Adrenaline and cortisol levels are spiking, as expected. Begin Phase 1. A section of the white wall slid open with a soft hiss, and a machine unlike any he had ever seen glided into the room. It was a multi-limbed, spider-like medical drone, all chrome and glass, with a dozen articulated arms ending in a terrifying array of needles, scanners, and scalpels. Izuku screamed, a raw, high-pitched sound of pure terror, thrashing against his bonds as the machine loomed over him. Fascinating, Luthor's disembodied voice commented, with the detached curiosity of a biologist observing an insect. The fight-or-flight response in a baseline human with no physiological enhancement. Document this, Doctor. A new voice, deeper and more gravelly, responded. Documenting. He's a scrawny thing. Are you certain the subject's cellular structure can withstand the initial bonding process? I am certain, Luthor replied, his tone sharp and absolute. His DNA is remarkably receptive. Pliable. Devoid of the chaotic markers of a quirk factor, it's the perfect blank canvas. Now proceed. The machine descended. One of its arms, ending in a scanner, emitted a beam of red light that swept over Izuku's body, cataloging every cell. Another arm gently swabbed his arm with a cold antiseptic. A third arm, the one he was most afraid of, extended a long, slender needle filled with a faintly glowing, golden serum. No! Please! Stop! Izuku begged, tears streaming down his face and soaking into the thin pillow beneath his head. I want my mom! Dad! Please! His pleas were met with silence. The needle pricked his skin, and a searing, white-hot pain shot up his arm, a fire that spread through his veins, making every nerve-ending scream. He arched his back, a raw, agonized cry tearing from his throat. It felt like his blood was being replaced with molten lead. Administering the Kryptonian human hybrid genome, Luthor's voice narrated calmly. The serum is derived from the DNA of two unique subjects from my world. Subject K, the Superman, provides the potential for solar energy absorption and cellular regeneration. Subject L, a remarkably resilient human female, provides the genetic bridge, the key to allowing the alien DNA to bond with a human host without causing catastrophic cellular decay. The pain intensified. Izuku's vision swam, the white room blurring into a vortex of light and agony. He could feel something happening inside him, a violent, cellular war. It felt like every part of him was being unmade, shredded, and then crudely stitched back together in the wrong order. Just as he felt consciousness slipping away, a new presence entered the room. The door slid open, and All for One glided in, his breathing apparatus emitting its steady, sinister hiss. He wasn't accompanied by the drone. He was alone, a monolith of darkness in the sterile white room. He stood beside the slab, looking down at Izuku's writhing, pain-racked form. There was no pity in the scarred mask that served as his face, only a chilling, predatory interest. The physical component is Luther's specialty, the villain rasped, his voice seeming to come from all directions at once. But the spirit, the will, that is my domain. The body cannot be remade if the mind resists. It must be broken first. He reached out a hand, not to touch Izuku, but to hover it just above his forehead. Izuku flinched, trying to pull away, but he was pinned. He could feel a strange, creeping pressure building inside his skull, a psychic intrusion that was more violating than any needle. And then, the memories came. Not his own, but twisted, weaponized versions of them. He was back at the birthday party. But this time, when Izumi called him normal, the entire room of heroes erupted in cruel, booming laughter. His father, in his all-might form, pointed a massive finger at him and bellowed, "Useless! You are no son of mine!" He was at the park, but when Izuma threw the ball, it didn't miss. It slammed into his chest, and he felt the phantom sensation of his ribs cracking, his breath stolen from him. His siblings stood over him, their faces contorted into sneering masks of disgust. "See?" Izuma's voice echoed in his mind. Deku. His mother appeared, but her gentle face was cold and distant. "I'm sorry, Izuku," she said, her voice flat and emotionless. "I have 3 gifted children to care for. I simply don't have time for a broken one. These are lies." Izuku sobbed, shaking his head, trying to dislodge the horrific images. "It didn't happen like that, didn't it?" All for One's voice was a silken poison in his ear. "Are you sure? This is how they truly feel. This is what they think when they look at you. They see a burden, a failure, a weakness in their perfect, powerful family. They were relieved when you were taken. It solved the problem for them." The psychic assault was relentless. Every moment of neglect, every casual dismissal, every time he had been overlooked was magnified 1,000 times, twisted into an act of deliberate, malicious cruelty. The villains weren't just injecting him with alien DNA, they were injecting him with a new past, a narrative of absolute abandonment. They were erasing the love he clung to and replacing it with pure, unadulterated poison. "They aren't looking for you," the villain whispered, the pressure in his skull becoming immense. "They have already forgotten you. They are happy you are gone." This was the core of the psychological torture. It wasn't just pain, it was the systematic destruction of his identity, of his love for his family. They needed to sever his every emotional tie, to hollow him out so they could fill him with their own dark purpose. And now, All for One continued, his voice dropping, for the final component. He placed his hand on Izuku's forehead. It was cold, the touch of a corpse. A jolt, not of electricity, but of something far worse, shot through Izuku's entire being. It felt like a part of his soul was being ripped out. In order to make room for new power, All for One rasped, "I must ensure there is no chance of a latent quirk, no genetic hiccup, interfering with Luther's masterpiece." He was using a quirk. A horrific, invasive power that felt like it was scouring Izuku from the inside out. It was a painful, violating act, a theft of something he didn't even know he had. It was the ultimate expression of their philosophy. They were taking his very humanity, his genetic heritage, and declaring it worthless, fit only to be discarded. The combination of the serum's agonizing fire, the psychic torment, and the invasive quirk was too much for his young body and mind to bear. His world finally shattered into a million pieces, and he mercifully fell into the abyss of unconsciousness. Days bled into weeks. Izuku's existence became a cyclical nightmare. He would wake on the slab, his body aching with a phantom pain. The medical drone would appear, administering another dose of the golden serum, each injection a fresh wave of agony. Sometimes they would take blood, tissue samples, bone marrow. He was no longer a boy. He was a biological experiment, a collection of cells to be monitored and manipulated. After the injections and the tests, the lessons would begin. He would be strapped into a chair in a dark room, his head held in a clamp, his eyelids forced open. A massive screen would flicker to life, bombarding him with images and information. He saw footage of a blue and red figure lifting mountains, stopping meteors, flying through space. "This is Superman," Luther's voice would explain, devoid of all emotion save for a cold, academic fury. "A god from another world. An alien who masquerades as a savior. He is a lie. His power is a cosmic accident, unearned and undeserved. He is a threat to humanity's potential." Then the images would shift. He saw All Might, smiling, saving people, basking in the adoration of the masses. "This is your father," the voice would continue. "A cheap imitation. A man who achieved his power through a handed-down quirk, another accident of birth. He too is a lie, a symbol of a corrupt system that values genetic luck over true genius and effort. Both of them represent the same flawed ideal, power without control, strength without superior intellect to guide it." Then came the final set of images. Footage from the drone that had watched him. He saw himself, small and crying in his room. He heard his own desperate whisper, "I just want to be like you." "They failed you," Luther's voice stated, a cold, hard fact. "They discarded you. We are giving you what you truly wanted. We are giving you power beyond their comprehension, not as a gift, not as an accident of birth, but through science. Through purpose. The power you will wield will be earned, forged in this laboratory, tempered by our design." All for One sessions were different, more insidious. He would sit in the room with Izuku, the rhythmic hiss of his breathing a constant, unnerving presence. He would talk for hours, his voice a low, persuasive rumble. He spoke of the hypocrisy of heroes, of the flaws in society, of the tyranny of the strong who preached peace while hoarding power for themselves. He painted a picture of All Might not as a hero, but as a cage. A smiling warden who kept society weak and dependent, preventing humanity from evolving. "He wants to be a symbol," All for One rasped. "A pillar. But what happens when a pillar falls? The entire structure collapses. It is a fragile system, built on the strength of one man. What we are creating in you, child, is something far more permanent. A new foundation. An order where power is wielded by those with the vision to use it correctly. You will be the instrument of that new world." He would tell Izuku stories, twisted parables of children with powerful quirks who were celebrated, while those with lesser or villainous quirks were ostracized. He framed it as a grand injustice, an inequality that he, All for One, was trying to correct by liberating quirks. "I am a savior, in my own way," he would say, the audacity of the statement staggering. "I give power to the powerless. I take it from those who are unworthy. Your family, with their genetic blessings, are the epitome of the unworthy. They did nothing to earn their gifts, and they cast you out for not having one. We are your true saviors. We are giving you the greatest gift of all." Slowly, insidiously, the indoctrination began to take root in the fertile soil of his trauma. His own memories were now a confusing, painful blur. The line between what had actually happened and the villain's twisted version of it began to fade. Was the laughter at the party real? Did his mother really call him a broken thing? The certainty he once had was gone, replaced by a gnawing, agonizing doubt. The love for his family, once the bedrock of his existence, was being systematically eroded, replaced by a confusing cocktail of anger, resentment, and a strange, terrifying sense of gratitude towards his captors. They were hurting him, yes, but they were also the only ones who saw his potential. They were the only ones who were giving him what he thought he always wanted. Power. The physical changes began subtly. Scratches from the restraints healed overnight. The constant ache in his bones was replaced by a strange, humming energy. One day, after a particularly agonizing injection, his captors left him alone for an extended period. The bright lights of the lab suddenly felt warm, comforting. He could feel their energy soaking into his skin, not like heat, but like nourishment. The deep, cellular exhaustion that had plagued him for weeks began to recede, replaced by a nascent, unfamiliar strength. Luther and All for One observed this from their control room, watching the boy's biosignatures on a massive screen. "The solar energy absorption is beginning," Luther noted, a rare flicker of triumph in his eyes. He pointed to a graph displaying Izuku's cellular energy output. His mitochondria are adapting, becoming microscopic Kryptonian solar batteries. The process is accelerating. The human half of the genetic code is acting as a perfect stabilizer. All for One watched the screen, his head tilted. And his psychological state? Fragile, but malleable, Luther replied. The emotional foundations have been shattered. He is beginning to question his own memories, to accept our narrative. He is a blank slate, just as I predicted, ready to be programmed. Good, the villain hissed. When the physical transformation is complete, the true training can begin. He must see us not as his captors, but as his mentors. His creators. His true family. The final procedure was the most terrifying of all. Izuku was sedated, but not fully unconscious. He was aware, in a hazy, dreamlike state, as they wheeled him into a different room. This one was dominated by a large, arch-like machine that hummed with immense power. The genetic forge, Luther's voice announced from the speaker. The serum has introduced the new DNA. This machine will activate it. It will use a combination of targeted radiation and kinetic force to shatter his existing cellular bonds and force them to reform around the new genetic template. It will be intensely painful, but it is the final step. When he emerges, the boy he was will be gone forever. What remains will be the foundation of Project Chimera. Izuku was locked into place beneath the arch. He could feel the power building, the air growing thick and heavy. He wanted to scream, to run, to go back to his little room with the All Might posters, back to a time when the worst pain he knew was being ignored. But he couldn't move. He could only watch as the machine began to glow with a terrifying, otherworldly light. Feel that, child? All for One's voice whispered, seeming to come from inside his own head now. That is the power of a god. The power of the sun. A power your father could never give you. A power you will use to tear down his world of lies. Embrace it. Become it. We are your saviors. We are your fathers now. The machine fired. A wave of energy, pure and unimaginably powerful, slammed into him. It was not fire or electricity. It was something more fundamental. It was the pain of creation. Every cell in his body screamed as it was violently, brutally rewritten. His human DNA, the legacy of Inko and Tashinori Yagi, was shattered and then forcibly fused with the alien code of a god and the resilience of a human from another world. His scream was lost in the roar of the machine. His consciousness, his very sense of self, was annihilated in a supernova of agony and power. He was no longer Izuku Yagi, the quirkless, neglected boy. He was raw material being hammered into something new on the anvil of villainous ambition. When the machine powered down, its hum fading into an eerie silence, the body on the slab was still. The monitors that tracked his vitals went wild, displaying readings that were no longer entirely human. His heart rate was slower, stronger. His body temperature had risen slightly. His cellular energy output was off the charts. A single, solitary tear escaped from his closed right eye, tracking a path through the grime on his temple. It was the last tear of Izuku Yagi. When he next opened his eyes, the boy who cried it would be gone, a ghost haunting the shell of a living weapon. Project Chimera was complete. The subject was ready for the next phase. Consciousness returned not as a gentle dawn, but as a jarring, violent intrusion. One moment, there was the infinite, painless void of oblivion. The next, there was the cold, hard floor. Izuku gasped, a ragged, desperate intake of air that felt like his first. His body convulsed, a single, violent shudder, as if his soul had been slammed back into his flesh from a great height. He pushed himself up, his limbs trembling. He wasn't in the white medical bay anymore. He was in a cage. The room was a perfect cube, perhaps 20 feet on each side. The walls, floor, and ceiling were made of a seamless, matte black material that seemed to drink the light. It felt unnaturally smooth and cold to the touch. Obsidian, he vaguely registered, a type of volcanic glass. There were no windows, no doors, no visible seams. The only light came from a single, recessed panel in the ceiling, casting a dim, sterile glow that did little to dispel the oppressive darkness. How long had he been out? Hours? Days? He had no way of knowing. Time had lost all meaning in this place. His memories were a chaotic, fractured mess, the searing pain of the forge, the poisonous whispers of All for One, the cold, clinical voice of Luther, and the ghostly, twisted images of his family's disdain. He clutched his head, a low moan escaping his lips. It hurt to think. It hurt to remember. His body felt strange. The perpetual, bone-deep ache he had lived with for weeks was gone. In its place was a profound emptiness, a hollowed-out feeling, as if he were a vessel that had been drained and was now waiting to be filled. He was still wearing the thin, paper-like tunic, but he didn't feel the room's chill. He felt a faint, deep-seated warmth humming just beneath his skin, a pilot light in the core of his being. He was thirsty. His throat was a desert, his tongue a piece of sandpaper. He looked around the featureless cell, but there was nothing. No water, no food, no toilet. Just the black, suffocating walls. He was a prisoner. An animal in a zoo. The realization hit him not with a surge of panic, but with a dull, leaden certainty. This was his life now. The pain was over, but the torment was just beginning. He slumped against the wall, pulling his knees to his chest, making himself as small as possible. He was so tired. He just wanted to sleep, to go back to the oblivion where nothing could hurt him. A sudden, jarring clang echoed through the cell, making him jump. A section of the ceiling slid open, and a thick, metallic chain was lowered. At its end was a raw, bloody side of beef, hooked through the flesh. It swayed gently for a moment before the chain retracted, dropping the meat onto the floor with a wet, sickening slap. Izuku stared at it, his stomach churning. It was food for a predator, for a beast. It was a message. This is what you are now. Eat, a familiar voice commanded, echoing from hidden speakers. It was Dr. Garaki, All for One's personal physician and a key figure in the experiments. The subject's caloric needs have increased exponentially. He must consume high-protein biomass to facilitate the final stages of cellular integration. Izuku recoiled from the raw meat, a wave of nausea washing over him. I'm not an animal, he whispered, the words barely audible. An astute observation, Luther's voice cut in, cold and precise. Animals are driven by instinct. You are a weapon, driven by design. A weapon must be fueled. Eat, or you will starve. The choice is yours, but the outcome is inevitable. The ceiling panel slid shut, and he was alone again with the hunk of meat. The smell, coppery and raw, filled the small space. Hunger, a primal, gnawing ache he had never felt before, began to claw at his insides. But his revulsion was stronger. He was still Izuku. He was still human. He wouldn't be reduced to this. He ignored the meat, retreating to the farthest corner of the cell. He closed his eyes, trying to focus on anything else. He thought of his mother's katsudan, the warm, comforting smell filling their kitchen. The memory was a pale, faded photograph, the emotions connected to it feeling distant and alien, but it was all he had. Hours passed. The hunger grew from a dull ache into a sharp, twisting agony. His stomach felt like it was devouring itself. His head pounded, and a dizzying weakness began to set in. The smell of the meat was no longer just repulsive. It was maddening, a siren song to the basest parts of his brain. He didn't know how long he held out. His resolve began to crack. His humanity felt like a thin, brittle shield against a rising tide of animal need. Tears of shame and desperation welled in his eyes. Just one bite. That's all it would take to make the pain stop. Before he could succumb, he was saved by an interruption. A low, hydraulic hiss broke the silence. An entire wall section, directly opposite him, began to retract upwards, revealing a second, identical chamber. This one, however, was not empty. Standing in the center of the other cell was a monster. It was a Nomu. Izuku recognized it from his hero studies, but this one was different from the ones he'd seen in news footage. It was leaner, its exposed muscles coiled like thick steel cables under its tough, artificially darkened skin. Its brain was exposed, pulsing grotesquely within a clear, protective casing. Its eyes were blank, unseeing orbs, and its mouth was a permanent, bird-like beak, from which a low, guttural growl emanated. It was a biological puppet, a creature of pure, mindless aggression. Izuku scrambled backwards, pressing himself against the far wall, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The walls separating their two cells had vanished. There was nothing between him and the monster. Phase 2, Luther's voice announced, as calm as a museum curator discussing a new exhibit. Durability and stress response assessment. We need to establish a baseline for the subject's new physiology. The gnome's head twitched, its blank eyes swiveling to fix on Izuku. It took a step forward, its heavy footfalls unnervingly quiet on the obsidian floor. Let's see what our little creation is made of, all for one's voice rasped, a chilling undercurrent of amusement in his tone. Engage the test subject. A high-frequency shriek, inaudible to Izuku but clearly a command to the creature, echoed through the chamber. The gnome's growl deepened into a roar, and it charged. It crossed the 20 feet between them in the blink of an eye. Izuku had no time to scream, no time to even think. All he could do was throw his arms up in a pathetic attempt to shield his face. He expected a crushing impact, the splintering of bone, the searing agony of death. He braced himself for the end. Instead, he felt a powerful, jarring thud. The gnome's massive, rock-hard fist had slammed into his forearms. He was thrown backwards, his small body flying through the air like a ragdoll. He hit the obsidian wall with a sickening crack that echoed in the cell. The impact knocked the wind out of him, and his vision momentarily went white with stars. But that was it. There was no shattering of bone. No searing pain. Just a deep, dull ache, like being hit with a medicine ball. The sound of the impact had been worse than the feeling of it. He slid down the wall, landing in a heap on the floor, gasping for breath but otherwise intact. He looked at his arms. They were already bruising, but they weren't broken. They should have been pulverized. The gnome seemed just as confused. It looked at its own fist, then back at the small boy, a flicker of something other than mindless aggression in its blank eyes. It let out another roar, this one tinged with frustration, and stomped towards him. Izuku scrambled to his feet, his mind reeling. How am I alive? He didn't have time to process it. The creature was on him again, its huge hand reaching out to grab him. He dodged to the side, his movements clumsy but fueled by a desperate, new energy. The gnome's fingers scraped against the wall where his head had just been, leaving 5 deep gouges in the volcanic glass. This thing was strong enough to carve stone with its bare hands. And he had just blocked a punch from it. The realization was so staggering, so impossible, that it broke through the fog of his trauma. It was real. The experiments, they had worked. The gnome lunged again. This time, Izuku wasn't fast enough. The creature backhanded him, a casual, dismissive swat. The force was immense. Izuku was lifted off his feet and sent spinning through the air. He slammed into the far wall again, this time with the full, horrifying force of the blow. The obsidian behind him cracked, a spiderweb of fractures emanating from the point of impact. Pain, sharp and blinding, finally erupted through him. It felt like every rib had been shattered. His head swam, and the world tilted on its axis. He collapsed to the floor, coughing, a metallic taste filling his mouth. Blood. Through his blurring vision, he saw the gnome stalking towards him, its silhouette a harbinger of death. This was it. The first blow had been a fluke. This was the end, and something inside him snapped. It wasn't a conscious thought. It was a primal, gut-deep rejection of his fate. He had been taken. He had been tortured. He had been broken down, and remade into something else. He would not die here. He would not be a failed experiment, a footnote in a villain's logbook. A rage, pure and incandescent, unlike anything he had ever felt before, surged up from the hollow space inside him. It was a rage born of pain, of loss, of the violation he had endured. It was the fury of a cornered animal. He screamed, but the sound that tore from his throat was not the panicked cry of a small boy. It was a sound of impossible power, a concussive blast of sheer sonic force. The air in the cell vibrated, the obsidian walls humming with the intensity of it. The recessed light panel in the ceiling flickered violently, and then shattered, showering the floor with glass and plunging the cell into near-total darkness. The gnomu, caught in the blast, staggered back, its hands flying to the side of its head in a distinctly un-gnome-like gesture of pain. The cell was now lit only by a faint emergency light from the observation window, which Izuku hadn't even realized was there. In the dim red glow, he could see the Nomu shaking its head, momentarily disoriented. The rage was still singing in his veins, a hot, intoxicating fire. The fear was gone, burned away by this new, terrible feeling. The monster advanced again, slower this time, more cautious. It loomed over him, its massive hand raised to deliver a final, crushing blow. Izuku, still on his knees, acted on pure instinct. He swung his fist upwards in a wild, desperate punch, aiming for the creature's descending arm. His form was terrible. It was a child's panic swing, with no technique, no training. His small, uncalloused fist connected with the Noma's thick, muscular forearm. Crack! The sound was not the sickening crunch of his own bones shattering. It was a sharp, explosive report, like a tree branch snapping in a thunderstorm. The Noma let out a high-pitched shriek of agony, a sound it should have been incapable of making, and stumbled back, clutching its arm. Izuku stared, his mouth agape. The Noma's arm, an appendage designed to trade blows with all might, was bent at a horrifying, unnatural angle. The bone was clearly, visibly broken. He looked down at his own hand. It was trembling, but it was fine. There was no pain. Not a single scratch. He had just shattered the arm of a Noma with a single, desperate punch. The humming warmth under his skin was no longer a gentle pilot light. It was a roaring furnace. The energy from the lights, before they shattered, had been absorbed, stored, and was now surging through him. From the observation booth, hidden behind one-way glass, Luther and all for one watched in stunned silence. The biometric data from Izuku was flooding their screens, readings that defied all known biology. Incredible, Luther breathed, his usual composure cracking to reveal a sliver of genuine awe. The kinetic impact should have pulped his hand. Instead, his bioelectric field must have reinforced his cellular structure on a subconscious level. A defensive reflex. He didn't just punch it. He projected a field of pure kinetic force. The scream. Dr. Garaki murmured, his eyes wide behind his thick goggles. The frequency and decibel level, it's physically impossible for human vocal cords. And his strength output, it is exactly what we designed, all for one finished, a deep, predatory satisfaction in his voice. The anger, the desperation, it is the perfect catalyst. The key to unlocking the power. In the cell, the standoff continued. The Nomu, its arm hanging uselessly at its side, regarded Izuku with something that looked disturbingly like fear. It had been programmed for mindless violence, but its core instinct was now screaming that the small, fragile-looking creature in front of it was a predator. Izuku slowly, shakily, got to his feet. The pain in his ribs was already fading, replaced by the warm, humming energy that was knitting him back together from the inside. He could feel it. He could feel the microscopic tears in his muscles sealing, the hairline fractures in his bones fusing. He was healing, at a rate that was impossible. He was terrified. This power, it wasn't his. It was alien. It was monstrous. It was the product of their torture. He looked at his hands, truly looked at them, and they felt like foreign objects, like weapons that had been grafted onto his arms. His terror warred with the lingering, intoxicating rage. A part of him, a dark, newly born part, wanted to see what else these hands could do. It wanted to hurt the monster. It wanted to make it pay for the pain, for the fear. The Nomu, its programming overriding its nascent fear, let out one last defiant roar and charged, leading with its good shoulder, intending to crush him against the wall. This time, Izuku didn't flinch. As the creature barreled towards him, time seemed to slow down. He could see the individual muscles in its shoulder contracting. He could see the specks of dust kicked up by its feet. Everything was suddenly, impossibly clear. He sidestepped the charge with a speed he didn't know he possessed. He wasn't just fast, he was a blur. The Nomu, unable to change its momentum, slammed into the wall Izuku had been standing in front of. As the creature reeled from the impact, Izuku's anger surged. He punched again, this time putting his whole body into it. He struck the Nomu square in the back. There was no sound of impact. There was only a deafening boom as the air in front of his fist compressed and then exploded outwards. A shockwave ripped through the cell. The Nomu was launched forward as if struck by a freight train. It didn't just hit the far wall, it went through it. There was a catastrophic roar of shattering obsidian and twisting metal as the creature's body punched a hole through the wall of the cell, revealing the sterile white corridor beyond. The Nomu lay in a crumpled, unmoving heap amidst the debris, its back caved in, its life functions terminated. Silence descended. A thick cloud of dust filled the air. Izuku stood in the center of the ruined cell, his arms still extended. He was breathing heavily, not from exertion but from shock. He had just punched a hole through a wall designed to contain monsters. He stared at the destruction he had wrought. He stared at the dead Nomu. He stared at his own, small, human-looking hand. This was the power they had given him. This was the curse they had laid upon him. A wave of nausea and vertigo washed over him. The rage that had sustained him vanished, leaving behind only a cold, hollow terror. He stumbled backwards, away from the carnage, until his back hit the wall. He slid down to the floor, wrapping his arms around himself, shaking uncontrollably. He wasn't human anymore. He was a monster. A weapon. He was exactly what they wanted him to be. In the control room, Lex Luthor allowed himself a thin, triumphant smile. He turned away from the screen showing the trembling boy and looked at the data feeds. The solar radiation in this world's atmosphere, unfiltered by the pollutants of my own, is an excellent catalyst. The subject's power is manifesting far more rapidly than my initial projections, he stated, his voice ringing with the pride of a scientist whose most audacious theory had just been proven correct. Phase 2 can begin. He looked at All for One. He has the power. Now we must teach him how to control it. We must shape it. And we must point it at its intended target. All for One's distorted chuckle filled the control room. Indeed. The whelp has survived the fire. Now let us begin to forge the sword. Down in the dark, ruined cell, Izuku didn't hear them. He was lost in his own world of horror. He looked up, and for the first time, he noticed his reflection, faint and distorted, in a shard of polished obsidian on the floor. He saw a small, terrified boy. But behind the fear, in the depths of his eyes, something new was stirring. A faint, ember-like glow. A deep, burning red. It was the awakening sun, rising in the heart of a boy who had been cast into the deepest, darkest night. And he was terrified of the dawn. The aftermath of the Nomu's destruction was not one of punishment, but of cold, clinical procedure. The ruined cell was sealed, and Izuku was moved to a new, larger enclosure. This one was no simple cube. It was a vast, circular chamber with a domed ceiling 50 feet high, resembling a small arena or a high-tech gladiatorial pit. The walls were the same seamless, light-absorbing black, but now they were dotted with emitters, projectors, and retractable weapon emplacements. This was not a cage. This was a training ground. A laboratory designed to test the limits of a living weapon. The brutal, soul-crushing lessons began immediately. There was no gentle introduction, no gradual scaling of difficulty. He was thrown into the crucible from the moment he awoke in the new chamber. His first lesson was in speed. Objective, survive, Luthor's disembodied voice announced, echoing through the arena. Engaging training sequence alpha. From hidden panels in the walls, a dozen small, spherical drones zipped into the room. They were sleek, silver, and hummed with a low, menacing energy. They darted through the air like metallic hornets, positioning themselves around him. These drones are equipped with low-yield laser emitters, Luthor explained, his tone that of a professor lecturing a class. They are programmed to target your center of mass. They will not stop until you are incapacitated or until you neutralize them. Begin. A high-pitched whine filled the air, and beams of crimson light shot from the drones. Izuku yelped, diving to the side. A laser bolt struck the spot where he had been standing, leaving a small, glowing scorch mark on the floor. The air sizzled with the smell of ozone. He scrambled to his feet, his heart pounding. Another volley of shots erupted. He ran, his small legs pumping as fast as they could. He was faster than a normal 10-year-old, but the drones were faster still. Their targeting systems were perfect, leading his movements, boxing him in. A beam seared across his back, and he cried out, stumbling. The paper-thin tunic he wore was incinerated, and a blistering red line appeared on his skin. Pain, sharp and immediate, lanced through him. But then, something strange happened. The humming warmth inside him, the stored solar energy, rushed to the wound. The stinging pain began to fade almost instantly, the blistering receded, and within seconds, the skin was smooth and unmarred, as if it had never been burned. He had healed. Again, the brief moment of astonishment almost cost him his life. 2 more lasers struck his leg, making it buckle. He fell, rolling, as more beams crisscrossed the air around him. He couldn't outrun them. He couldn't dodge them forever. He was going to be worn down, incinerated piece by piece. Faster, a desperate voice screamed in his head. You have to be faster. He pushed himself up, adrenaline and terror coursing through him. He focused on the drones, on the paths of their laser fire. Time, which had slowed down during his fight with the Nomu, began to stretch again. He could see the beams of light not as instantaneous streaks, but as projectiles with a discernible travel time. He could see the micro-adjustments the drones made before firing. He didn't think. He just moved. He pushed off the floor, and the world became a blur. He was no longer just running. He was a phantom, a whisper of motion. He weaved between the laser bolts, the beams passing through the space he had occupied a microsecond earlier. He felt the heat of them on his skin, but they never connected. To an outside observer, it would look like he was dancing through a deadly rainstorm without a single drop touching him. He was moving faster than he could consciously process, his body reacting to threats before his mind had even registered them. He could feel the air parting around him, the faint whisper of a sonic boom trying to form in his wake. Incredible, Luther's voice murmured from the speakers, a note of clinical satisfaction in his tone. His nervous system is adapting, processing information at a superhuman rate. He is perceiving the world in slow motion. This is the foundation of his speed, but speed wasn't enough. He couldn't run forever. He had to fight back. As he dodged another volley, he snatched one of the drones out of the air. His hand closed around the metallic sphere, and with a surge of the raw, untamed strength he discovered, he crushed it. Metal crumpled like paper, circuits sparked, and the drone went dead in his hand. 1 down. 11 to go. A new confidence, cold and sharp, cut through his fear. He wasn't just prey. He was a predator too. He moved through the remaining drones like a whirlwind. He was too fast for them to track, a ghost in their targeting systems. He would appear beside one, crush it, and vanish before the others could react. One by one, the drones fell, reduced to mangled heaps of metal and wires. When the last one was destroyed, he stood in the center of the arena, breathing heavily, his body humming with a strange, exhilarating energy. He had survived. He had won. There was no praise from his captors. Only the next lesson, strength application, all for one's voice rasped, taking over the instruction. Raw power is useless without control. Your display against the Nomu was crude, wasteful. A tantrum, not an attack. You will learn to focus your power, to make it a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. A 10-foot-thick wall of reinforced concrete slammed down from the ceiling, bisecting the chamber. Your objective, the villain continued, is to create a perfectly circular, 1-foot diameter hole through the center of this wall. Any deviation, any cracking or collateral damage, will be considered a failure. For every failure, the intensity of your training will double. You have 1 hour. Izuku stared at the wall. It was a monstrous slab of gray, likely laced with steel rebar. Creating a precise hole seemed impossible. His first instinct was to punch it as hard as he could, just as he had with the Nomu. He remembered the villain's words, crude, wasteful. He took a deep breath, trying to calm the frantic energy thrumming inside him. He walked up to the wall, placing his hand on its rough, cold surface. He tried to focus, to channel the immense strength he felt into a single point. He pushed, gently at first. Nothing happened. He pushed harder, putting his weight into it. Still nothing. He felt like an ant trying to move a mountain. Frustration began to build. The memory of his rage against the Nomu surfaced. He drew his fist back, the power coiling in his arm. No. Control. He looked at his hand again. What had Luther said? A bioelectric field. It wasn't just his muscles. It was something else, an invisible energy that surrounded him. Maybe he didn't have to push. Maybe he had to project. He closed his eyes, focusing on the spot in the center of the wall. He pictured the hole he was supposed to make. He imagined his strength not as a blunt instrument, but as a focused drill bit. He pressed his fingertips against the concrete, and instead of pushing, he willed the energy to flow out of him. At first, nothing happened. Then, he felt a faint vibration under his fingers. The concrete began to heat up. A low hum filled the air. He pushed the feeling, concentrating all of his will, all of his power, into that single point. A tiny wisp of smoke curled up from the wall. The concrete around his fingertips began to glow a dull red. The hum grew louder, more intense. With a final, agonizing push of concentration, he forced the energy forward. VMMM crunch. With a sound like grinding stone, a perfect cylinder of concrete was pushed out from the other side of the wall, landing on the floor with a heavy thud. He pulled his hand back. In the 10-foot thick slab, there was a perfectly smooth, perfectly circular hole, exactly 1 foot in diameter. The edges were cauterized and glassy from the intense heat and pressure. There were no cracks, no stress fractures. It was perfect. He stared at his hand in awe and terror. He hadn't just punched a hole. He had disintegrated the material on a molecular level, using focused kinetic energy and heat. Acceptable, all for one's voice stated, devoid of any warmth. But it took you 47 minutes. Far too slow. We will repeat this exercise tomorrow, and so it went. Every day was a new, brutal lesson. They taught him about his senses next. To hone his hearing, they would fill the chamber with a deafening cacophony of white noise, hundreds of sounds at once, and command him to isolate the sound of a single pin dropping. At first, the noise was a physical assault, driving him to his knees, his hands clamped over his ears. But slowly, he learned to filter, to focus, to navigate the world of sound in a way no human could. He learned to hear the frantic heartbeat of a rat hiding behind a wall panel, the subtle structural strain in the ceiling above, the almost silent hum of the observation cameras. His vision was an even greater challenge. They would plunge the room into absolute, pitch-black darkness, and then launch projectiles at him, forcing him to learn to see in other spectrums. He began to perceive the faint infrared heat signatures of the objects, to see the world in a ghostly palette of reds and yellows. His normal vision became telescopic at will. He could focus on a microscopic dust mite floating in the air 100 feet away, seeing the intricate details of its legs. Then came the most dangerous power. The one that terrified him most of all. They called it thermal radiation projection. He called it the fire in his eyes. It first manifested as a side effect of his rage. During a particularly frustrating training session, where he was forced to fight holographic projections of his family, their taunts echoing the twisted memories all for one had implanted, the fury had become unbearable. He'd screamed in frustration, and as he did, a wave of intense heat had blasted from his eyes, melting the holographic projector across the room into a puddle of slag. His captors were ecstatic. They forced him to practice, to control it. They set up targets of varying materials, steel, titanium, diamond, and ordered him to cut through them. At first, the power was wild, uncontrollable. The beams were wide, unfocused blasts of heat that incinerated everything in their path. The effort of trying to control it gave him splitting, agonizing headaches. But under the threat of punishment, usually a session with a sonic device that exploited his newly sensitive hearing, he learned. He learned to narrow the beams, to make them as fine as a surgeon's scalpel. He learned to control the intensity, from a gentle warmth that could heat a cup of water to a concentrated blast that could vaporize tungsten. Through all this, he was changing. The small, scrawny boy was gone. The constant influx of high-protein food and the intense physical exertion, all amplified by his body's absorption of solar energy, had transformed him. He was still lean, but his muscles were dense and defined, like tightly coiled springs. He looked healthier, stronger, than he ever had in his life. But his eyes held a haunted, weary look, the look of a child who had seen too much and endured far more. He was their perfect student. He learned quickly, he adapted, he grew stronger every day. He did everything they asked. He was quiet, compliant, and obedient. And it was all a lie. His true education was taking place in the dead of night, when the training was over and he was left alone in the silent, dark arena. Using his superhearing, a power they had so foolishly taught him to master, he started to listen. His cage was deep underground, buried beneath a labyrinth of corridors and laboratories. But sound traveled, and with his hearing, he could focus on a conversation happening rooms away as if they were whispering in his ear. He learned to filter out the hum of the ventilation, the drip of a leaky pipe, the scuttling of vermin, and to lock onto the two voices that mattered, Luther and All for One. He would lie on the cold floor, his eyes closed, and eavesdrop on their late-night strategy sessions, piecing together the true nature of their plan, one whispered conversation at a time. "The boy's progress is exceeding all expectations," he heard Luther say one night, his voice faint but clear. "The Kryptonian DNA has bonded perfectly. At his current rate of growth, he will surpass the original Superman's power levels within a decade. All Might won't stand a chance. Power is only one part of the equation," All for One's rasping reply came. "The psychological conditioning is paramount." "Does he still speak of his family?" "No. He hasn't mentioned them in weeks. He is becoming withdrawn, detached. The trauma has been successfully weaponized. He associates his old life with weakness and pain, and this new life with strength and survival. He is ours, a cold, hard knot formed in Izuku's stomach. He is ours." Another night he heard them discussing their alliance, a conversation that revealed the true, terrifying scope of their ambitions. "Your core technology is fascinating, if chaotically unpredictable," Luther mused. "But my understanding of metagenetics and advanced energy systems is what made this project possible. Once All Might is eliminated and society is destabilized, my technology will be the foundation of the new world order. You will provide the infrastructure, Luther. But I will provide the control," All for One countered, a silken menace in his tone. "The people of this world understand the language of quirks. They fear me, and they will obey me. Your role is that of a toolmaker. A brilliant one, I admit. But do not forget who is wielding the tools." The tension between them was a palpable thing, even from rooms away. They were not partners. They were predators, temporarily allied to take down a larger target, each one fully intending to betray the other when the time was right. But the most important, the most world-shattering revelation, came from a single, carelessly spoken word. He was listening to Luther give a report to an unseen party via a communications link. "Project Chimera is a success. The subject, a native of this dimension, has fully integrated the Kryptonian genetic code. Unlike the original, he is proving to be far more programmable. Kryptonian." The word struck him like a physical blow. He had heard them mention Superman and an alien, but the specific word gave him a key. A piece of the puzzle he hadn't known he was missing. He started to connect the dots. His strength, his speed, his healing, his powers of flight that he was just beginning to discover in clumsy, uncontrolled bursts. It wasn't a quirk. It was something else, something from another world. The name Superman wasn't just a random code name. It was the original source. The knowledge changed everything. His despair, the hopeless, crushing weight that had defined his existence in this cage, began to recede. It was replaced by something new. Something cold, and hard, and sharp. Resolve. They thought they had broken him. They thought they had hollowed him out and filled him with their poison. They were wrong. They had tortured him, twisted his memories, and violated him in every conceivable way. But in their arrogance, they had overlooked one crucial thing. Izuku Yagi had always been an analyst. Before, he had analyzed heroes. Now, he analyzed his prison. He analyzed his captors. He analyzed his own, new powers. Every brutal training session became a data-gathering exercise. Every command they gave him taught him more about what they wanted, what they feared. They had given him the power of a god, intending to shape him into their ultimate weapon of destruction. But they had also given him the tools to fight back. His super senses, his analytical mind, his indomitable will to survive, a will they had unwittingly forged in the fires of their own cruelty. He was not their weapon. He was not their puppet. He was not Project Chimera. He was a prisoner, gathering intelligence. He was a survivor, biding his time. He was a boy who now understood the full scope of the evil he was facing, an evil that spanned dimensions. And he knew, with an absolute, chilling certainty, that he was the only one who could stop it. He played his part perfectly. He followed every order. He endured every painful lesson without complaint. He let them believe he was their creature, their mindless golem of power. He buried his true thoughts behind a mask of detached compliance. But late at night, in the darkness of his arena, a new lesson plan was being formed. One they had not designed. He would practice in secret. He would push his senses to their absolute limits, listening to the entire facility, mapping its layout in his mind through sound alone. He pinpointed guard patrols, identified structural weaknesses, located the power conduits that fed the entire complex. He learned to control his flight, not just in explosive bursts, but with a silent, hovering grace. He practiced moving without making a sound, a ghost in his own cage. He honed the control over his heat vision, learning to use it at such a low intensity that it was invisible to the naked eye, using it to scan the walls for imperfections. The despair that had once threatened to drown him had been burned away, leaving behind a core of cold, hard diamond. The boy who cried for his father was gone. The boy who just wanted to be a hero was gone. In his place was something new. Something forged in pain, armed with impossible power, and guided by a singular, unyielding purpose. He was going to escape. And he was going to make them pay.